You got the touch. You got the power. Yeah!
Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Tanner Reviews the World. Did I ever mention to you that I like Transformers? Because I do.
I'm not going to get into a long story here. Transformers was my favorite show growing up, and it is still one of my favorite shows to this day.
And guess what? Transformers 2 and Transformers 3 sucked. These atrocities will not be mentioned again in this review. But, on to what we're going to be talking about today. Transformers comic books.
The Transformers began in 1984 and was originally created as a toy line by Japanese company Microman and Diaclone, and were about a war of transforming robots that left their home world of Cybertron and found their way to Earth.
And naturally, where there's a toy line, there's always a television show and a comic book shamelessly promoting their product to children around the world.
Well, let's be honest here. The television show was mainly used primarily as a ploy to get little children to buy their toys. After all, the show was very episodic, and there are only a few episodes that have any kind of continuity to them at all. They were basically there to show cool Transformers fighting and then push the reset button at the end of the day.
However, the comic books were a little bit different. Now, ever since its invention, television has been a way better means at selling your product than anything printed, especially whenever it comes to children. While the television show could just survive merely as fodder for selling products, the comic book actually had to work at it.
Though don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that the comic book did not do a good job selling to kids. All I'm saying is that the comic books had to work harder at it. The comic books actually had a lot more continuity to them than the television show, and the characters are a lot more fleshed out. Hell, they even go into some very serious topics. They actually use the words death and kill, the Decepticons are a lot more threatening, and Sparkplug, the dad of our protagonist Buster, actually has a heart attack in one of the earlier comics.
And I will freely admit, even though I'm a big fan of the television series, the comic books have them beat in just about every way. I mean, as far as telling a story is concerned, they're just better, hands down. Well, almost all of them. Now, with every series, you're always going to have your bad eggs, no matter what, and the comic books are no exception. And today, we're going to be talking about the creme de la creme of bad Transformers comics. Transformers issue 31, The Car Wash of Doom. I don't think piece of shit really can justly describe this comic. Surreal, strange. I'm not really sure what words to use. But today, we're going to be looking at the good, the bad, and the... Alright, I'm going to level with you guys. There's nothing really good about this comic. And there's nothing all that ugly about it. It's just bad. It's just bad across the board, and today I'm going to discuss with you the reasons why this comic is so bad. So, let's get started.
First off, before we even get into the book itself, I want to talk about the cover. More importantly, the tagline of the comic in the upper left corner. It's wet, it's wild, it's the car wash of doom.
Great. Now I don't know if I'm going to be looking at a comic book or looking at porn.
I don't know, I feel like they could have gone with a way better catchphrase than wet and wild. It makes me worry that after turning any of the pages, I'll see the Autobots and Decepticons in bikinis rubbing each other's chassis, if you know what I mean.
But, luckily, this is not the case.
The subject where we are going to start off with is the lack of Transformers. The Autobots never make an appearance in this book, and the few Decepticons that show up only appear in the beginning. The only Transformer that actually sticks around for the whole book is Ratbat.
Some of you might be asking right now, just who is Ratbat? Well, let me explain.
In the original G1 series, one of the most popular Transformers was one named Soundwave, a Decepticon that transformed into a boombox. He was also complete with a slew of minions that transformed into tapes, one of the most popular of these tapes being Laserbeak, a Transformer that turned into a bird.
And Ratbat is basically Laserbeak's meth-addicted cousin.
Ratbat was a tape that transformed into a, you guessed it, a bat. He was used very sparingly in the show, and out of his tape counterparts was one of the least seen.
And Rat-Bat is seen a lot more in the comic books and is, well, smarter?
Rat-Bat has a bigger role in this comic than he does in the whole show, playing the central antagonist instead of just a random lackey.
And I'm not really sure how to say this, but whenever you're actually making a story with a narrative, you really need to make your antagonist, well, threatening.
Maybe it is because I saw him in the show, and he was about as threatening as an overzealous gnat, but Rat-Bat just doesn't seem threatening. It is almost like he is one treat away from being housebroken. Even during the climax of the story, whenever Buster is attempting to save the day, he doesn't even bat an eyelash at the thought of picking up a tire iron and just going to town on the thing.
I mean, even on the cover where Rat-Bat looks the most threatening, Buster's still not batting an eyelash at taking a crowbar to the thing. Now, I can see where they were going with this. They're trying to make the protagonist look a lot stronger and fearless in the face of adversity. But, let's be honest here. You're going up against an enemy that's complete with, well, 20-foot-tall robots, and the smaller ones are even just as threatening. It just kind of belittles your antagonist whenever a teenager takes one look at the thing and says, "Yeah, I can take that fucker, let's do this!"
You couldn't have had Shockwave be the antagonist? Hell, he was even in the first couple of pages, and to be honest, he is probably the strongest of all the Decepticons. It is even mentioned in the series that he in many ways is stronger than Megatron. At least this way you have had a reason to put the Autobots in the comic, which, to be honest, would make it a whole lot better. Transforming robots versus transforming robots is the reason that we read these things. Who wants to see some teenage boy face the Decepticons' equivalent of a house pet?
Hey, I said we weren't talking about those atrocities. We are here to talk about comic books, not Michael Bay ejaculating all over a film reel with his CGI.
But even if Rat-Bat is a shitty antagonist, the humans are not much better. Which brings me to the second thing that's wrong with this comic. The humans. Now the central protagonist, Buster, there's nothing wrong with him. It is actually business as usual for him, and you actually get into some interesting backstory that he wants nothing to do with the Transformers due to the fact that his dad had a heart attack and he wants to protect him.
This is kind of a refreshing change of pace. You know, Buster is just this kid, and he wants nothing to do with this fight against the Autobots and Decepticons, especially whenever it almost cost his dad his life. To be honest, I think characters like Spider-Man could actually take a few pointers from Buster on the true lesson of responsibility.
However, I can't say too many positive things about the rest of the characters, the biggest of which comes from our heroine of this story, Buster's love interest, Jessie. Now, the relationship between these two is something that has kind of been building up throughout the comic books, but where this relationship just goes into the realm of insanity is the date they go on. Jessie returns to the mechanic shop to visit Buster using the excuse that she wants to wash her car. She practically forces Buster to come with her through the new car wash, which is complete with strobe lights and heavy metal music no less, and apparently this gets her hot and bothered enough to the point where she starts making out with Buster.
Oh, yeah, nothing gets my blood pumping like going to a car wash.
Oh yeah, just look at this hot sudsy action. I'm stiff as a board just looking at it. Honey, I know you like him, and I know those teenage hormones are on overdrive, but come on, think of your future. If you ever have kids, do you really want to tell them that your magical moment between you two was in the front seat while you two were going hot and heavy at the Soap and Suds? And speaking of this reminds me what the biggest problem of this comic book is.
It's the car wash of flippin' doom!
Come on, who really thought that this was a good idea? Was Invader Zim on the creative team in the making of this thing? The entire premise is just too far-fetched to actually make for a decent story.
And I know that comic books have their crazy premises, but come on! Who took a look at soap and water and said, we can make this into an evil creation?
It really doesn't help that the writing does a poor job at actually passing this villain off as a legitimate menace, especially when it is conjured up by Soundwave's mixtapes. Okay, here's the general premise. After taking over a ship for reasons, Rat-Bat shares with his Decepticons that he has an ingenious plan to finally steal all the energy from the world. He hypnotizes a CEO or something and plans to build a car wash that hypnotizes people into taking their cars to the Decepticons' HQ and putting all their gas into the reserves.
Well, aren't you sad that you didn't think of it?
Now, the plan is a little creative and a little unexpected. And hell, I'll even give it up to Ratbat that it is something that would really go under the radar and might even work to steal a lot of reserves. At least enough to keep the Decepticons' HQ powered up as long as it remains low-key.
But this isn't even close to the end.
Maybe one of Ratbat's flaws is megalomania, because he immediately shifts this gear from 1 to 5 and burns his clutch out doing it. Ratbat later exposits that he has built a new car wash and he will use it to hypnotize people forever and take over the world. As you and your customers went through them, you all succumbed to the hypnotic stroboscopic opticons within.
Hypnotic stroboscopic opticons. Okay, now you're just making shit up.
Which command all to come here and empty most of the gasoline in their cars into these 2 storage tanks, helping the Decepticons achieve their goal of stealing all of the Earth's energy resources.
Really, buddy? You think that building a single car wash and hypnotizing a few people to empty their gas tanks into your reserve is going to take over the world's reserves? You, sir, need to go home and check your plans again.
The one thing that I love is that no other Decepticon besides Laserbeak are seen. Now, I know I mentioned earlier that the lack of Decepticons was a problem, and I still want to see more Transformers in a Transformers comic. But to be honest, it kind of makes sense. There is no way that the Decepticons thought this was a good idea. They probably just let him go ahead and do it just to see the Autobots kick his ass, in which they don't even kick his ass. He gets his ass handed to him by a couple of teenagers. You know Ratbat spent the next couple of weeks getting his ass laughed at by every single Transformer he came across.
Alright, I know I'm contradicting myself a little bit here, but what I'm trying to say by this is that the whole idea should have just been scrapped for a new Transformers comic that had a lot more Transformers in it. The concept is just too outrageous to actually be made into a decent comic. I mean, if it's anything else but a satire, you just really can't work with this, even if you're one of the best comic writers out there.
The Transformers comics are a lot of fun, and if you are a comic book collector or enthusiast, I recommend picking up a few and reading them. However, unless you are buying them all, I would skip this one. I guess it is fun to have a laugh at, but there's not much else going on for it, and I just can't recommend it to you.
So, on my scale of 1 to 5, I gotta give this a 1. It's just too crazy and too far-fetched for me to actually recommend it to anybody. The only way I would is if you're going to intentionally pick it up to make fun of it. Other than that, there's really not much effort to actually go out and look for the thing. Well, that wraps it up for another episode of Tanner Reviews the World. Tune in next week. Till then, see you later.
You got